Welcome to question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House and MLA for Calgary-Egmont. Last evening, the House was dealing with Committee of the Whole stage of various bills, especially the School Act. The House sat until almost 1:30 this morning, so members are quite tired at the moment. After question period today, the House will be dealing with Committee of the Whole stage with Land Titles Amendment Act, the Languages Act, Regulations Amendment Act, and Legislative Assembly Statutes Amendment Act. And then, later in the afternoon, third reading of Bill 22, the Labor Relations Code. The House will be seated again tomorrow until 5:30 when the members will break for the long weekend and then be back in the House for next Tuesday. This is now the longest sitting in Alberta legislative history.
Order. Mr. Speaker.
Let us pray. O Lord, we give thanks as legislators for the rich diversity of our history. We welcome the many challenges of the present. We dedicate ourselves to both the present and the future as we join in the service of both Alberta and Canada. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to present a petition to the Assembly signed by 23 of my constituents in St. Albert, urging the government to institute a committee to investigate the possibility of a plan to acquire First Investors and Associated Investors assets from the receiver-manager Coopers & Leibren. The purpose of this plan, Mr. Speaker, would be to expedite the distribution of cash to depositors, the majority of whom are elderly and unable to work.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Calgary McKnight.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they be proceeded with. Bill PR 19, the Calgary Municipal Heritage Properties Authority Amendment Act 1988. Bill PR 20, the Maskawatchis Cultural College Act. Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has further had the following bill under consideration and recommends that it not be proceeded with. Bill PR 17, St. Vladimir's Ukrainian Orthodox Congregation at Calgary Tax Exemption Act. I request the concurrence of the Assembly in these recommendations.
Having heard the report by the Honourable Member for Calgary McKnight, does the Assembly concur in the recommendations? Opposed? Carried.
Notices of motions.
Government. Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give notice of motion that tomorrow I will ask leave of the Assembly to introduce Bill 62, the Free Trade Implementation Act.
Introduction of bills.
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to request leave to introduce a bill being the Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 1988. This is an annual housekeeping act consented to by all parties in the Assembly.
The Honourable Attorney General has moved first reading of Bill 40, Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 1988. Those members willing to give consent to first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 40, Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 1988, introduced by the Honourable Mr. Horseman, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm tabling a response to questions 202 and 203 as posed by the Honourable Member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to file with the Assembly responses to questions that arose during study of the estimates.
Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table the annual audited financial statements of the University Hospitals Board and the Alberta Children's Provincial General Hospital.
Minister of Education.
Speaker, I wish to rise to table a response to written question number 191.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you, sir, and through you to members of the Legislative Assembly, an outstanding Albertan and his grandson. This individual has committed thousands of hours to the betterment of our province and to our community. He is in the members' gallery, and I would ask Mr. John Devereux and his grandson Curtis to rise to receive the warm welcome of this Legislative Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the Mulrooney trade deal fails to provide guaranteed access to U.S. markets for our producers. In other words, no binding disputes mechanism. Mr. Speaker, and that's a major reason why the New Democrats don't support the deal. Mr. Speaker, it's becoming increasingly apparent, however, that there are hidden costs to Canadians because of concessions wrought by U.S. negotiators. For example, Mr. Speaker, our farmers have already lost the benefits of price guarantees in the Canadian domestic market. Now, my question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is this. Will the Minister advise whether his department has compiled a list of other benefit programs for farmers which could be compromised or eliminated to satisfy the terms of the trade deal?
Mr. Speaker, we've done a thorough analysis of the agreement that has been initialed by the United States and Canada, and it's obvious to us that if we don't have that access to the U.S. market, and I'll share with the honourable member some figures as it relates to our dependency on markets other than what we do have within our own province. If one looks at our beef production, Mr. Speaker, we only consume 23% of that production, and we have to have a home for the other 77%. Pork production, Mr. Speaker, we export 60%. Barley production, we export 50%. Wheat production, we export 80%. And I just throw that out, Mr. Speaker, to underscore the importance that this province places on having markets other than our own. And that's why we're encouraged by the greater access and the greater assurance of access that we will have in the event that this agreement is proceeded with.
Well, Mr. Speaker, nobody denies that the market is important. But the point we make, there is no guaranteed access under this deal, Mr. Speaker. That's the major point. But I want to be more specific, Mr. Speaker. The provincial interpreter for the National Tripartite Stabilization Program has raised a grave concern about the future of beef stabilization program under the Mulrooney trade deal. Mr. Dalswell says the U.S. has already hinted, even prior to the implementation of this agreement, that they might consider this an illegal subsidy under the Mulrooney trade deal. My question is, does the Minister of Agriculture share the concern of the provincial interpreter, and if so, what is he doing about this to avert this benefit to our farmers?
Mr. Speaker, in response to the first part of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition's question, I should share with him that there is an opportunity for greater access whereby the removal of the meat import law is ensured. So contrary to what he has indicated, there is greater access. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, what we want to do is ensure that our farmers are on a level playing field. That is what we wish. Our farmers can compete with anybody in the world as long as those false subsidies that are both in the U.S. and the European Economic Community are removed, and we're fighting very hard to see that that is the case so that our farmers can compete on an equal basis.
Mr. Speaker, this is just sheer rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. I asked a specific question, Mr. Speaker, and I want to ask, is he concerned, as Mr. Doswell is, about the fact that our beef stabilization program could be history if this deal comes through? Only on that issue, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, on that issue, we do not believe that tripartite will be history.
Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about one of the officials in his department is saying this very clearly. Maybe the minister better look into it, Mr. Speaker. Obviously he hasn't. But there's another program, and he said very clearly, Mr. Speaker, that we'll probably lose the Crow benefit offset. My question very specifically about the Crow benefit offset, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to lose that. Would the minister indicate what assessment he has done on this program and what effect this will have on our farmers?
Mr. Speaker, we've done a considerable amount of analysis as it relates to the Crow benefit offset, and I'll answer that after I've answered the other questions the Honourable Leader put to me, whereby I've already indicated to him we are going to have greater access because the meat import law is going to be removed. That's specific number one. As it relates to tripartite, we do not believe that it will be affected. That's the specific answer to his question number two. Number three, the Honourable Member should do a little more research. Number three, Mr. Speaker, as it relates to the Crow benefit offset, there would be nothing we would like better than to do away with that program. And that's why we've been working so hard to have a change in the method of payment under the Western Grain Transportation Act, whereby there would be the opportunity whereby that payment would go to the individual farmer rather than to the railways. So, Mr. Speaker, it contradicts nothing that we've advocated since day one. In fact, we're very encouraged with the progress that our farming population could make under a trade arrangement with the U.S.
Vermilion Viking supplementary. Yes, supplementary to the minister, acknowledging that there's approximately a £2 billion deficit of red meat market in California. Do you foresee that our killing capacity through plants such as the newly built or building Cargill plant in High River will be on stream in time to meet the demand that comes through the free trade agreement when it's put in place?
We're very encouraged, Mr. Speaker, with the added emphasis that is being placed within this province with the further food processing sector, not only as it relates to the U.S., but also as it relates to the Pacific Rim countries.
Thank you. Westlock Sturgeon supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the minister. I wonder if he could share with the House what kind of logic he uses to justify the fact that the Crow benefit, if it, as it's mentioned in the free trade agreement, is highly illegal if it's used to ship beef. It's illegal if it's paid to the railroads. It's wrong.
Thank you, honourable member. The question. Thank you, honourable member. The last number of days, the House has really been getting very long supplementaries, very long answers. Time after time, we have many members left on the question list, so I'm sure, as with the first part of this question, we'll have more succinct supplementaries and succinct answers. Thank you. No, honourable member, minister.
Mr. Speaker, in response to...
The chair will send for the blues. The member did indeed ask a question, and there's no point of order. Minister of Agriculture with the answer.
In response to the honourable member's question, order.
Sit down. Sit down.
I don't see how we can deny me a point of order, please.
Mr. Speaker, in response to the honourable member's question, let me indicate to him that under the agreement, those commodities going through the West Coast ports, the Western Grain Transportation benefits will be removed as they go into the U.S. We recognize that that will have an impact on our canola, but we also recognize that they have removed the 7.5% tax, ad valorem tax on it, so they two pretty well equal themselves out. And our farmers do agree that in the long run it will prove more beneficial than it will prove as a deterrent.
To second main question. Honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon. Oh, I'm advised this is a leadership race. I'm not sure. Let's please.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question, the member from Vegreville.
Very good, Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, a major international conference being held this week in Toronto on the changing atmosphere is studying the greenhouse effect and the related problem of serious drought on the prairies. Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the major causes of the greenhouse effect is the increase in carbon dioxide in the air. And because most experts agree that the burning of fossil fuels is the major cause of this carbon dioxide buildup, the U.S. Congress was told last week that we may have to look at reducing the use of fossil fuels by 40 to 50% in the future to combat this serious problem. And I'd like to ask the Premier, given the extent to which the Alberta economy depends on fossil fuels, is he examining ways in which consumption of these things could be reduced gradually to avoid dramatic reductions in the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are many theories about the reasons for the so-called greenhouse effect. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, I would caution the honourable member from taking any one of them and placing too much importance to them. I've been discussing this matter with our Minister of the Environment just recently, and perhaps the Minister may want to supplement my answer.
Well, my second question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, because burning fossil fuels puts massive amounts of new carbon into the atmosphere, whereas burning ethanol recycles it, a senior advisor to Environment Canada has said that an ethanol energy policy could put a big dent in the carbon dioxide problem. And I'd like to ask the Premier if he would instruct the Alberta delegates at this 4-day conference to contact Dr. Hengveld to gain a more complete understanding of how developing an ethanol industry in Alberta, using ethanol and gasoline, could help to combat the greenhouse effect problem.
Mr. Speaker, of course, if we are able to develop an ethanol industry in Alberta on either economic or even close to an economic basis, we will certainly be trying to do it. Frankly, the people who are at the meetings will be able to obtain the information they require.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Alberta is a major producer of fossil fuels, and I'm trying to show the Premier that ethanol could be viewed as an ally rather than a threat to his pet industry. And I believe he's got a chance to take a leadership role here, Mr. Speaker, and show that we're willing to do our bit to combat the greenhouse effect. When will the Premier announce this government's intentions to initiate a program that will promote and encourage the development of an ethanol industry here in the province of Alberta?
No tax on it.
Mr. Speaker, as we've discussed probably a dozen times in the legislature this year, the government continues to work with those who wish to establish an ethanol industry. The government would like to establish an ethanol-based industry. However, Mr. Speaker, it has to have some resemblance to economics, solid economics, and as of right now, it does not provide that opportunity. Nevertheless, we won't give up. We'll keep working at it.
Well, I won't give up, and I'm going to keep working on them, Mr. Speaker. My final question, Mr. Speaker, because ethanol blend fuels made in Manitoba, by the way, are available in Alberta, and because provincial government vehicles are, large consumers of fossil fuels, will the Premier direct that all provincially owned vehicles begin to use ethanol blend fuels whenever possible?
Mr. Speaker, it's a representation from the honourable member that would be happy to take a look at. I should point out to the honourable member that he should not be living in the past of this great dependence by Alberta on the fossil fuels. If he would have been paying a lot of attention, he could see that there's been a tremendous gain in diversification in this province. Through the leadership of this government, we have made a massive breakthrough in diversification into the forestry industry. We have the tourism industry, just booming in this province. The technology and research industry, all of the results of the government's efforts in diversification. Also remember, too, that our main industry is agriculture.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Thank you. Order, please. Chair would also note that perhaps an alternative form of fuel would be some of the hot air that some of the members are intent on supplying into the chamber in all parts of the chamber. All parts of the chamber, honourable members, including from the chair. Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for suggesting that your 10% helps make it a better fuel too. Mr. Speaker, to the speaker, or to the premier. The fuel of the future does seem to be ethanol, in that California has now moved to some fuels up as high as 85% by Atlantic refining. Could the Premier show the same leadership as he's tried to show in the upgrader by bringing the Western provinces together for something as outmoded as upgrading heavy oil, and put a joint conference together and putting something together on making ethanol for the Western provinces, which would then cut down our pollution?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already answered that question today.
Crow's Nest. Pincher Creek, Crow's Nest.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister of the Environment. Can the Minister of the Environment advise the Assembly as to whether or not the greenhouse effect is a theory, or is it based on some scientific fact as to exactly what's going to happen?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's any doubt that the greenhouse effect is a reality. There has been a dramatic change in climate patterns in most of the geography of the world in the last 10 years. I think it's premature, however, at this point in time to scientifically, at least have science tell us quantitatively what is causing the greenhouse effect. There are certainly a number of theories in effect and in place. I would as well, Mr. Speaker, that I'm on my feet, wish to caution the member from Vegreville as well. Ethanol, the burning of ethanol also causes carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a major component factor in terms of the environmental pollution and environmental degradation that we've had and face in the Western world. And if the honourable member from Vegreville is attempting to suggest that ethanol would release and remove carbon dioxide from our environment, then he would be wrong.
Thank you. Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Littlebow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, many deserted, divorced, or abandoned women in this province, many of them mothers, have been thrown into financial and emotional chaos as a result of their inability to collect on their court maintenance. Women often deserted, their lives are shattered, and they are left with nothing but children to feed and bills to pay, Mr. Speaker. Now, when the director, the bullfrog in the pad over there, when the director of the province's maintenance enforcement program comes out and says that the success ratio is 54%, or 43%, I'm sorry, meaning that 57% of them getting there. And then how can the Premier then believe, this question to the Premier, that a 43% success ratio is an acceptable program?
Mr. Speaker, that program is the responsibility of the Attorney General. I've answered a number of times in this House about the impact of the maintenance enforcement program, which is having a very good record relative to collecting, particularly with respect to the new orders which are being filed with it. Point out to the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party, once again, though, that there were many orders that had been in existence where for many years no payments had in fact been made, and there was an accumulation of arrears. It was very difficult and has been difficult, and in some cases will be impossible to collect all the arrears and in fact the maintenance payments that are due under some of those older orders. However, significant progress is being made, and I've said that before during the course of my estimates, of course, my answers to the member for Avonmore. Whether or not the honourable member was listening, I'm not sure. But it is improving all the time, and we are encouraged by the results.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary back to the Premier, although this is not on the program so much as the fact that part of the program is the Honourable Minister has already pointed out, is a shortage of staff and slowly getting worked in. Could the Premier give any assurance to the legislature that he will increase the staffing so that the present load, apparently of around 1,100 to 1,500 cases per worker, is put down to something reasonable and at a level that they can work at? Would he increase? Well, he's not.
Speaker, the matter will be under consideration in the next round of budgetary considerations by myself as the Attorney General as we move into the next budgetary phase. The honourable members will know that funds have been voted to the Department of the Attorney General by himself and his colleagues and other members of the Assembly for this current fiscal year. We will continue our operations in the current fiscal year with the staffing that we have, and we believe that that will be adequate. I would also point out that it is a matter of, there is a matter of some cost recovery, of course, for the government, and that is a factor that will be taken into consideration in the next round of budgetary discussions with my colleagues in Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, back to the Premier again, although he may want his henchmen to re-answer it. The fact is that we've hired 67, I think, $2.1 million to police welfare. They can find the money for that. Why can't the Premier find the money for more people administering a maintenance enforcement program? It'll do more for the family and everything else that he brags that he's a champion of than just sitting there doing nothing.
Mr. Chairman, there's no indication that the addition of additional staff will be the sole answer to collecting some of the arrears that presently exist and some of the more difficult maintenance claims and orders which are in existence and some of which have been in existence for a very long time. Therefore, that is only one of the considerations that will have to be taken under review by the Treasury Board in the budgetary process. I should point out, as the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party and all MLAs are aware, there is, in addition to the difficulties for the persons seeking to collect under the maintenance orders, difficulties faced by the spouses who are supposed to be paying as a result of difficulties with employment and other debt problems that they have encountered. Those matters are reviewed by the court from time to time, and that's part of the process. And I'm sure all honourable members have received representations that the maintenance enforcement people are overzealous in their collection efforts.
Mr. Speaker, I haven't run into any of those. Yes, Mr. Speaker, back again to the Premier on my final question. Would the Premier at least agree to match the increase in staff for maintenance that he is willing to ask to countenance the increase in staff for policing welfare? Will he at least match that?
Mr. Speaker, I've already answered that question. The Honourable Leader is repeating himself.
Thank you. Vermilion Viking, followed by Edmonton Avonmore. Supplementaries.
Yes, a supplementary to the Minister of Social Services. There's a tremendous amount of human stress and confrontation during some divorces. Have you any idea of what percentage of spouses, rather than going through the Maintenance Enforcement Act where there is that confrontation and the hassle of legal confrontation, how many come to social services for welfare instead of going through the Maintenance Enforcement Act?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the event that a family is not able to manage, obviously they are entitled to social allowance. And it is at that point in time that in the past we would have invoked a particular proceeding under the Department of Social Services, but now we go through the Maintenance Enforcement Act in order to try to assist them to collect.
Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, to the Attorney General, I wonder if he would consider notifying other departments of the government, such as the Student Finance Board, of the difficulties it's experienced in getting maintenance payments, because some people on maintenance enforcement are not getting their payments and are being cut back on student loans because Student Finance Board assume that the maintenance enforcement program will enforce the payment.
I'll discuss that matter with my colleague, the Minister of Advanced Education. I've appreciate the member's sentiment, but I think I'd better clarify with her exactly what she means subsequently, but I will certainly discuss that with my colleague.
Member for Little Bow, followed by Pincher Creek, Crow's Nest, and Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Economic Development. It follows up my June 23rd question on federal procurement from the province of Alberta. We at present the federal government purchases from Alberta some $300 million, but our share is some $780 million, $500 million more. The Minister's answers the other day were rather passive rather than active. Could the Minister indicate what kind of initiatives in an active way that the Minister or the government will take to secure that $500 million for the province of Alberta that we should have?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is correct in his numbers. The proportion of federal government procurement that Alberta companies are successful with is about 3.8% of the procurement. Within the last few days, I met with the federal minister, Mr. Decotre, and we had a lengthy discussion on this matter as well as matters related to interprovincial procurement. And he advised that the department, that the federal government intends to, in response to our representations as well as other governments' representations, begin a process of consultation to expand the opportunities for a balancing of procurement throughout Canada. We're going to continue to work at this because it is important, and we do recognize that the amount of procurement that Alberta companies have been successful in obtaining is not proportionate to the federal amount.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, could the Minister indicate whether the emphasis could be shifted from the historical emphasis that was based on food, oil, and gas to some of the service industries of Alberta, and what plan does the Minister have, along with the federal Minister, to increase the emphasis in that area? For example, in the area of advertising, use of Alberta consultants in other areas, and some other special services.
The business of federal government purchases is a huge part of the spending of the federal government, and included in the plans for amending the policies of the federal government are those areas referred to by the honourable member. We have made over a period of time a number of suggestions as to how balance could be achieved without disadvantaging the Canadian taxpayer in terms of value received for money spent. And we expect that many of our suggestions will be implemented.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, could the Minister indicate what type of activity is put in place to involve the private sector of Alberta in making them aware of the opportunities in terms of the federal procurement?
Through our regional development offices, as well as our departmental officials and our consultants, we work with business groups, the Alberta branch of the Canadian Manufacturers Association, to discuss opportunities for Alberta companies to compete. Also on the companies themselves have the obligation to be aware of opportunities that exist. There is also pressure put on the federal government to more widely distribute information on contract packages.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, I raised a question with regards to certification of companies relative to defense contracts the other day. The Minister indicated that the government doesn't actively get involved in certification. Could the Minister indicate what steps could be taken to enhance that position when industries that are in Alberta are not certified and can't get certified until they have adequate funds or until they secure a contract? It's sort of a chicken and egg situation. What does the government plan to do in that kind of a circumstance?
Mr. Speaker, we are working with companies on a one-on-one basis where necessary to assist them. And my colleague, the Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, responded to that matter. As a matter of fact, just 2 days ago, I participated in the opening of a new facility in Edmonton, where the Department of Technology, Research and Telecommunications and ourselves had worked with, and they have now secured defense contracts, and their employment has risen rapidly. They now employ 34 highly skilled people. The company name is Amtech, and that's just one example of the government working directly with the company in order to assist them in accessing federal contracts.
Supplementary, Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my supplementary is to the Premier. Could the Premier please tell the Legislature whether he has raised this issue with the other Western Canadian premiers with a view to creating a unified front so that we can strengthen our hand in negotiations on this matter with the federal government?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of procurement, will the Minister confirm that with the Mulroney-Reagan trade deal, the federal government gives up options to specifically direct procurement to regions within Canada? Effectively, Alberta is now trying to get on a train that's already leaving the station.
Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General might wish to supplement my answer, but it was clear through the course of the negotiations that concluded in the free trade agreement that the Canadian government and the provinces agreed that measures that would assure regional strength in our country would be maintained and could be maintained under the free trade agreement.
Pincher Creek, Crow's Nest, followed by Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, the Alberta government, through the efforts of our Premier and Minister of Energy, have been active in pursuing ways to enhance the competitiveness of Western coal into the Ontario marketplace. In January of this year, the Intergovernmental Secretariat to the Action Committee on Western Canadian Low Sulphur Coal to Ontario released its report, and on May the 26th, the Deputy Prime Minister announced the federal government's response to this Action Committee report. My question to the Minister of Energy, could he advise as to what measures the Alberta government will be taking to support this initiative?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is correct in terms of identifying the Action Committee on Western Coal going into Ontario. The committee was responsible for looking at ways to improve the competitiveness of Western Canadian coal. And a committee was formed consisting of the chairman, the Deputy Prime Minister, Don Mazankowski, included the Ontario Premier Peterson, Alberta's Premier, and BC's Premier and Saskatchewan's Premier. And they dealt with recommendations on the date that the honourable member suggested to discuss this report and recommendations from the so-called Intergovernmental Secretariat. And one of the important aspects of the recommendations was that there would be no intention to subsidize Western Canadian coal moving into the Ontario market. They discussed 14 initiatives that were recommended in the research and development area. The total cost of all those projects would be some $82 million over a 4-year time period. And the Alberta government today is announcing that we are committing up to $16 million over 4 years to participate in research and development projects of interest to Alberta-based coal industry.
Supplementary question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister advise the Assembly as to what initiatives specifically the Alberta government will be responding to in the Intergovernmental Secretariat report, and in particular whether any initiative to support coal slurry pipelines will be undertaken?
Well, Mr. Speaker, different governments are taking lead roles in certain of these projects, and the Alberta government is taking a lead role in a number. including the project that the honourable member has referred to, the coal oil slurry pipeline, looking at the possibilities of moving coal east through pipelines mixed with oil, separating the oil from the coal, or the coal from the oil at the Great Lakes, and then shipping the coal into Ontario. Other projects include fine coal processing, improving the technology at mine sites, and one very interesting technology that work is being done. It's called coal agglomeration, a process for heavy oil and coal are added together, and you end up with a better product of coal and also a lighter crude. And work is being done at the present time on that project in the Devon Research Centre.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy. There have been media reports that the federal government's $27 million support will be going to Ontario. Could the Minister confirm as to where the federal government support will be going?
Mr. Speaker, that is not true. Those reports were erroneous. The federal government, through the Western Diversification Office, will dedicate up to $27 million for research and development in the coal area, which would be about one-third of the total cost of all the initiatives. And the monies will be allocated on a project-by-project basis. In fact, from here, the provinces and the federal government will be sitting down and examining each of these initiatives to agree on the cost sharing of each of those projects. And as I said before, we have committed up to $16 million over the next 4 years for research into those particular projects.
A final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy. Given the announcement today with regards to initiatives that will be taken, can the Minister advise of any other effort by the Alberta government to support coal and research development?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in 1984, this government formed or established the Office of Coal Research and Technology, and this office assists industry in improving the competitiveness of Alberta coals into the international markets as well as our domestic markets. Also, in 1978, when the Alberta Canada Energy Resources Research Fund was established, we committed at that time up to $35 million in coal research and technology. In addition, I've made reference to the Devon Research Centre. We have spent $20 million on that world-class, first-rate coal research centre, and certainly honourable members that have had the opportunity to go there have indicated that they are certainly impressed with the work that's being done there.
Let's face it, this is not going to move one piece of coal, all the research and development, Mr. Speaker. There's only two ways. Ontario has to agree to reduce its sulfur emissions, and then it has to be equalized through a transportation grant, Mr. Speaker. That's the only way we'll get there. My question is to the Minister. Has he determined, Mr. Speaker, that this is, in fact, would be illegal under the Mulroney trade deal and will never happen?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it seems as though that the honourable member points his finger and is more firm on topics that he knows the least about. And he certainly has demonstrated that with his comments. And, Mr. Speaker, honourable members know full well that Ontario have full intention of adhering to restricter environmental controls that will be imposed upon them in the future, particularly Ontario Hydro. They have already reduced the purchases of coal containing heavy, or that have a larger or have a heavy component of sulfur from the United States, and are in fact buying some more Western Canadian coal. When the nuclear reactors come on stream, up until about 1992, when that will be complete, Ontario will then need more coal to meet, the Ontario Hydro will need more coal to meet future demands, and it will be their intention at that time to buy Western Canadian coal if our Western Canadian coal can become competitive. And so these initiatives, Mr. Speaker, are attempts to make Western Canadian coal more economic. Ontario Hydro would have the option of building in very expensive scrubbers to try to get the sulfur from the coal from the United States. Very, very expensive. And we are very optimistic, unlike the Honourable Leader, who's always pessimistic, we are very optimistic that these initiatives will lead to more sales of coal from Western Canada.
Thank you. Edmonton Millwoods. Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, my questions today are to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade regarding the provincial program for international development assistance. Many Albertans who are concerned about and work in the field of international development have become quite distressed in recent years to see some very major cuts in the budget allocations for international assistance, which is provided to the non-government organizations through the Alberta Agency for International Development. And in addition, many of the people in the international development community have been very concerned about this year's new bizarre regulation that discriminates against indigenous agencies, quote unquote, versus non-indigenous agencies. But my first question to the Minister is simply this: can he advise the House what assessment he did, if any, about the impact of that savage 50% cut in 86-87 before he introduced another major cut this year of another 12.5%? Did he do any assessment about the impact of that?
Mr. Speaker, yes, we have. It's a very important program, our Alberta International Aid Program. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, Alberta contributes more in international aid than all other provinces combined, notwithstanding the cuts. Now, and yes, Mr. Speaker, we do discriminate in favor of Alberta NGOs. And that's a change that we've made, that Alberta non-governmental agencies where Albertans are gathering money to make contributions to third world countries, yes, we will discriminate in favor of Alberta NGOs. And we've set priorities for assistance in order to accommodate the reduced budget, and we think they're appropriate. They are in health care to assist people in underdeveloped countries in improving the quality of health, and also to assist them in developing self-sufficiency, particularly in small business.
Is that what he told the people who are not going to get a well drilled in their village, that we're #1 in the country here still? Well, Mr. Speaker, let me ask him simply this: how does he justify these new discriminatory regulations that discriminate against the national churches and the national humanitarian organizations like Oxfam, who are getting dollars, Mr. Speaker, from the same Albertans that give dollars to other agencies? Why is he discriminating against those people who have now been limited to a cap of $50,000 and only 2 project categories that they can apply for, whereas the indigenous agencies, quote unquote, can apply for $200,000 and 4 categories different that they can apply for? Why is he discriminating against Albertans this way?
Unfair.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member has a different understanding of discrimination than I do. I believe that it is appropriate that Alberta taxpayers' money be used to match Alberta Indigenous non-governmental agencies at a higher level than those that are located outside of Alberta.
It's all the same Albertans, Mr. Speaker, whether they donate through their church or through another agency. But let me ask the Minister this. Given that the rhetoric in the government's own report here, Caring and Responsibility, singled out the Alberta Aid Program for special mention as an exemplary program, which it is, can the Minister advise why it is that there was no consultation about these particular changes before they were introduced, these discriminatory regulations?
Mr. Speaker, perhaps the honourable member isn't aware that when it became necessary as a result of the difficult financial situation that the government found itself in, we corresponded with every non-governmental organization that we had been involved with and asked their advice on how they thought we should prioritize the aid program and which program should receive priority. And that advice was sought. We took it into account when we developed the new guidelines, and the new guidelines are what all members are well aware of, where Canadians are very generous in their contribution to third world countries, but we felt that it was appropriate to give priority to Alberta NGOs. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, continue to provide generous support to non-governmental organizations that are located outside of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, let me simply ask the Minister this last question then. Given that these very severe budget cuts in the international assistance program create such hardship not only for the non-government organizations but for our development partners worldwide, would the Minister at least be willing to do this before he initiates another major cut to this valuable program, to make a commitment today to reinstate the previous practice of having a consultation in person with all of the agencies once a year? Would he at least do that?
Mr. Speaker, I can't comment on what the budgetary plans will be for the coming year. That's a matter that all members will be aware of in due course. I'd like to again advise the honourable member that this program is a very generous program, and it has become an important one for volunteer groups who raise money to help people around the world who need the help, and so it is an important program. And I will continue to consult with the NGOs as we have in the past. The comments that I receive are that most NGOs recognize that when a government has a $3.5 billion deficit, that it's necessary to make some cuts and to prioritize. And there has been understanding by most people who understand fiscal responsibility.
Additional supplementaries. Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government continues to bend its own rules to give money to friends and party faithful with little regard for objectivity and fairness. We have seen this time and time again with the likes of Peter Pocklington and Les Mabbitt, and now we learn of...
Honourable member, sorry. There's a great difficulty in the House. It's a violation of the procedures of the House to be naming people who cannot defend themselves in the House. And that's been happening too much, and it's got to stop. So if the member would like to continue with the question, please. Thank you. Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? No. Opposed? Chair hears no. Sorry. There are 2 points of order to be dealt with at least. First one comes from yesterday when the member for Edmonton Belmont rose on a purported point of order with regard to some comments made by the Premier in question period with regard to questions raised by the Leader of the Opposition concerning debate of Bills 21 and 22. The Chair has reviewed the record and in the opinion of the Chair, taking into account the number of comments that have been made on both sides of the House with regard to the whole debate of Bills 21 and 22, the Chair does not regard the point of order as being indeed a point of order. Now, with respect to this day, the Chair recognizes Westlock Sturgeon.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my point of order is entirely tied onto the Blues, so I am at your mercy entirely. You said that you would get the Blues. As to whether or not I had composed a question, Mr. Speaker, I must admit that I tripped over my tongue a few times. I'm usually so articulate, but this time I wasn't. But nevertheless, I did not think I had, there's a subject and a predicate. I think I had got through the subject, but not the predicate.
Okay. Well, the Blues are here. And this is what was said by the member for Westlock Sturgeon. Supplement. Supplementary to the Minister. I wonder if he could share with the House what kind of logic he uses to justify the fact that the crow benefit, as it's mentioned in the Free Trade Agreement, is highly illegal if it's used to ship beef. That, in the opinion of the Chair, is a question. Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair would like to point out to the member for Westlock Sturgeon that while it may not be listed as unparliamentary, it is the custom of this House not to use cuss words. And the Blues And the review and the audio shows that the word hell was used at least 3 times, and perhaps the honourable member could refrain from doing that. It would be much better for those poor, tender ears out there that are listening to CKUA Access or on television. Thank you. The chair is willing to recognize the point of order once the chair gets a chance to sit down for half a moment. Edmonton Meadowlark, and then... Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order concerning your remark that I should not mention people's names in this legislature. I would rise on a point of order which I would indicate in either Beauchesne or the standing orders, but I don't see specifically where that has ever been said. But I would like to point out that it's very difficult for you to assume that I was accusing anybody of anything until I had finished stating what I was going to state, one. And secondly, it is also the case that regardless of what Mr. Pocklington or Mr. Les Mabbitt took from the government or was received from...
Please, honourable member, let's not compound the issue. Let us deal with the point of order.
Regardless of what any member of the Alberta public may have received from the government, it is not an accusation against them that they received it. It is simply an accusation, if that's what it can be construed as at all, that the government gave it to them. And the situation... The situation that you may inadvertently have put this legislature in is the government spending money in a way that we cannot in any way hold them accountable because we can't even raise the issue to identify it in question period. I believe that I am fully within my rights to have mentioned the names of these 2 individuals and to have mentioned the names of other individuals as well if I am pursuing the issue of this government allocating money without objectivity unfairly to party faithfuls.
Thank you, honourable member. You are now violating. Any other comments with respect to the point of order purported? Indeed. The chair is recognizing St. Albert, followed by Westlock Sturgeon, and that will be it.
I rise to support the honourable member for Meadowlark, Mr. Speaker, in his statements on his point of order. And I believe that he made it very clear that he wasn't maligning anybody. What he was doing was asking the government, if they're foolish enough to give out money, then certainly they deserve all the criticism that they get. And that's exactly the point, Mr. Speaker. This government has exercised no control when it comes to giving out monies to particular friends. Now...
Order, please. Order, please, honourable member. Now we'll speak to the point of order. Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I wanted to take a bit of a different tack, and maybe you could enlighten me, but my impression was that in the House of Commons or in the Mother Parliament or the traditional British parliamentary system, whatever we say, we are immune from being sued. As a matter of fact, we're even immune from serving notices to ministers that were using the lottery funds illegally. But the question I'm trying to develop, Mr. Speaker, and you may be able to help me on it, my assumption then is that if indeed this is the case, in other words, they found it necessary through 1,000 years to develop a rule of law that you cannot be sued, well, you must be mentioning somebody to be immune from. In other words, if you are never to mention anyone except each other in the House, how would the possible custom ever developed that you could be sued for saying something? So therefore, you must be saying something. Therefore, if you must be saying something, it's got to be from somebody outside the House.
Okay. Government House Leader. Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, just speaking very briefly to the point of order, whatever it was, as purported, Mr. Speaker, I would point out that the honourable members, perhaps because they are before television cameras, are loosely using the expression, the honourable member for St. Albert obviously doesn't want to listen to a correction of his statement. Mr. Speaker,
The honourable members, perhaps because they were before television cameras, are loosely using the expression give. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to put it on the record that when services are provided for a fee, whether by persons who are believed to be friendly to the government or unfriendly to the government, as long as there are services and a fee collected for same, that is not, there is no, Mr. Speaker, when a loan guarantee, when a loan...
Order, please. Order. Get it straight, honourable members. A point of order cannot be raised on a point of order. Therefore, the chair will continue to listen to honourable members, just hang on, folks. Government House Leader.
And, Mr. Speaker, when a fee is collected for a loan guarantee, as is the case in loan guarantees, that is not a gift. Mr. Speaker, I do not believe that the honourable member has a point of order based on the statements that he has made.
No, the chair is not prepared to entertain any more comments. Thank you. The chair is not prepared to entertain any more comments on the point of order on the basis of the fact that according to standing orders and the tradition of the House, the chair just listens to as much as it cares to. That's the basis on that. Now, if we'd like to slow down for half a moment, honourable folks, to the member for Edmonton Meadowlark, the chair did not rule the question out of order. The chair was admonishing the member for Edmonton Meadowlark with respect to what was built leading into casting aspersions upon two members of the general public. Citation is Beauchesne 359, and it has substance with standing orders as well. Subsection 7, a question must adhere to the proprieties of the House in terms of inferences, imputing motives, or casting aspersions upon persons within the House or out of it. That's what the chair was attempting to do, admonishing the member for Edmonton Meadowlark. Then what occurred was the end of question period in terms of the time, and then unanimous consent was denied the honourable member to continue with question period. And it's inappropriate for any member in the House to be calling out shame at this moment either. It is the custom of the House, and the custom of the House has been adhered to, but it is still also the privilege of the House to deny unanimous consent. And any member, no matter where they sit in this House, can do that. And throughout this very lengthy session, it has only been denied once or twice. I believe this is twice, perhaps a third time. So so the House has been more than generous in the use of the extension of time to question period. That also relates back, as the chair tried to point out to the House again today, the length of the questions, the length of supplementaries, and the length of answers. Now, with regard to Beauchesne 359, subsection 7, the proprieties of the House and about casting aspersions on persons within and without. Yes, the chair agrees that it is inappropriate for these comments to be made with respect to two of the members as two individuals as mentioned today, and that's been entirely out of hand. The chair also agrees that it is inappropriate to make comments about certain leaders of the labour movement in the province by name. So the point is, honourable members should take it into consideration that you really are abusing the general public by bringing up their particular names. It is not indeed fair to them who have absolutely no recourse to come back and to try to defend their names and their reputation here. And that's exactly what transpired here in terms of this afternoon. The matter... Now, is the chair to interpret that there's going to be an additional point of order from St. Albert? St. Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my point of order is raised under Standing Orders 23. When the government House Leader was making his comments on the point of order raised by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark, he alleged or implied that what I was doing was grandstanding in front of the television cameras. Mr. Speaker, clearly that is false. What I was simply trying to imply, and what I was simply trying to say, was that we cannot, in this assembly, blame anybody for accepting government largesse. The point was, where do you line up to get it? That was...
Yeah, thank you. That's